This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and this week we have Katherine, Druckman, and I talking to her boss, actually, Dries Buytaert of Acquia, and more famously, the creator and alpha maintainer of Drupal. That's coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 621, recorded Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. Dries Buytaert and Drupal. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Linode. Simplify your cloud infrastructure and cut your cloud bills in half. Get started on Linode today with $100 in free credit. Text TWiT to 474747 or visit linode.com/floss and click on the Create Free Account button to get started. Good morning, good evening, good time, wherever it is, wherever you are. I am Doc Searls, and this is FLOSS Weekly. I am joined this week by Katherine Druckman, and there she is. Hey, Katherine. So
hey.
You're in Houston still, I assume?
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
I'm in Los Angeles, which I'm not normally at, but yeah. I'm on the set of Knives Out, it looks like, a little bit. It's a borrowed place. So our guest this week is Dries Buytaert, and he is your boss, and which is one reason we have you on here.
Yeah.
So I can
no
ask
pressure.
if your answer is no to do you know him, there's a problem.
There is a bit of a problem. But I've known him a lot longer than that. So.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I should say that Katherine and I are former colleagues from Linux Journal, and for many years, and we used Drupal there, which we may go into during the show, which I want to hurry to get into. So, first, I have to let you know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Linode. Managing your complex cloud infrastructure shouldn't be hard. Linode makes cloud computing for all. Simplify your cloud infrastructure with Linode's Linux virtual machines and develop, deploy, and scale your modern applications faster and easier. So why do over 800,000 developers choose Linode? Well, there's Intuitive Cloud Manager and full-featured API. They have data centers around the world with the same simple and consistent pricing regardless of location. Choose the data center nearest to you. And they have award-winning customer support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, with no tiers or handoffs, regardless of your plan size. Think of all the things you can do. Host your website, build your app, store or backup media. It's up to you. Easily launch and enrich your developer applications, hosted services, websites, AI and machine learning workloads, gaming services, or CI/CD environments. Launch and scale in the cloud with their virtual machines. You could choose shared and dedicated compute instances, or you can use your $100 in credit on S3-compatible object storage, managed Kubernetes, and more. Be sure to check out Linode's new YouTube channel for video tutorials, security tips, and more at youtube.com/Linode. Bryce Adams from Metric says, from the start, we were looking for a partner, not a provider. Some of the large providers see us only as a transaction. Linode is the kind of partner that will be with us from the start, today, and beyond. We also want to congratulate Linode for their multiple Stevie Award wins. Their sales and customer service were awarded for excellence for the third consecutive year. Simplify your infrastructure and cut your cloud bills in half with Linode's Linux virtual machines. Whether you're developing a personal project or managing larger workloads, you deserve simple, affordable, and accessible cloud computing solutions. Get started on Linode today with $100 in free credit for listeners of FLOSS Weekly. You can find all the details at linode.com/floss. Not at your desktop, simply text TWiT to 474747 to get your free credit. Linode.com/floss and click on the Create Free Account button to get started. If it runs on Linux, it runs on Linode. Okay, so welcome, Dries, to Floss Weekly. It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
You're in a new home near Boston somewhere. In Boston. I'm in
Boston.
Southie
I
now.
live in the city.
Or Southie, as they say there.
That's right.
It's yeah. We were talking earlier to go watch Good Will Hunting to find out how to correctly pronounce things in Southie. Yeah, I lived in Boston for a number of years.
I watched it many years ago, but I should rewatch it.
Yeah, it's a good show. And so Katherine's with us here too. And so I want to start. I want to give just a little bit of history here, which is that of my history anyway with Drupal, which is that at Linux Journal when we were covering blogging, I was an early blogger, and so I was assigned do like a comprehensive piece on blogging, and we covered a number of different blogging platforms, and two stories came out of that. One was a lot of the people we spoke to said you have to not only look at Drupal, you have to try it. And Linux Journal got on Drupal and was on it ever since that. And that was maybe at version 3 or something like that. I don't know what it was.
In the 4s, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
way back
4
when.
Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'd like to start with a maybe simple question. Maybe it's not, which is, okay, you started. I mean, give us the sort of history of where. What itch were you trying to scratch with Drupal in the first place, and then what got it to be the world-striding colossus it is now?
It's kind of an accident, to be honest. But I started Drupal over 20 years ago, a long time ago, and at the time I was a student. I studied computer science at the University of Antwerp in Belgium, where I was living at the time, and this was before. Mobile internet. This was before Google was a public company. Frankly, this was before we had cell phones, and even text messaging was invented, if you will. So, picture me living in a dorm, and there was 5 or so other friends in the dorm, and we didn't have a good means to communicate because, as I mentioned, none of us had cell phones at the time. And so the itch that I was scratching was I wanted to have a system, a message board, effectively, to stay in contact with my friends. And at the time, I also wanted to learn about PHP and MySQL and some of the other emerging web technologies. And my plan was to spend a few nights putting together a quick message board so that we could exchange messages. And also, so I could learn a little bit about these new web technologies. And that's really how Drupal got started, to be quite honest. And the way it actually became Drupal is when I finished college and I moved out of my dorm, I needed to move this message board, which was an internal application. It was running on our LAN, if you will, to move it to the public internet. Right, and so I had to register a domain name for it, and I moved it to the web, and it evolved. It evolved from this message board to, I would call it, an experimental platform, and I started adding all sorts of new features, like RSS feeds were kind of being invented at the time, and I was, one of the people on the mailing list. I would implement RSS feeds. Added a feature that was called Public Diaries, which eventually became blogging. It wasn't called blogging even at the time, et cetera, et cetera. And so, that's how it got started. It evolved out of a message board that I started in my dorm.
So it grew obviously quite a bit. Tell us a little bit about the community that you acquired early on, and then how that developed into what became Acquia, your company, which is a substantial company at this point.
Yeah. Maybe to put that in perspective, today Drupal, I think, is one of the largest open source projects in the world still today. like every year, we have over 10,000 individual contributors and over 1,200 organizational contributors. And typically, they contribute code. It's not just code, but the majority of that is code. So Acquia is a company around Drupal. We help large organizations be successful with Drupal. We're over 1,100 employees. So we've grown quite a bit, but the early days, it was just me. And, what I actually ended up doing is as I was experimenting with my platform and I was blogging about it as well, it attracted an audience of people sort of interested in the future of the web. And they started giving suggestions, and maybe you could implement this, or what do you think of that? And at some point, I just kind of decided that instead of me having to implement all of these suggestions, it would make a lot more sense to make the software behind my website open source. And so decided to make it available as open source. Maybe expecting 10 people to use it. It wasn't, again, a master plan or a grand vision or anything like it. It was just wanted to share it based on my experience with Linux. And, we started to attract developers and contributors one by one, and in the beginning, people would email me patches. When that stopped scaling, we set up a mailing list so people could email patches to the mailing list. And eventually we moved to, our own, issue tracking system, sort of like GitHub. Before GitHub was born, we built our own. And that really helped us scale too. So I would say, Drupal is 20 years in the making. And some people think of it as maybe an overnight success, but the reality is that it was, it took a long time to get to scale. And maybe to put that in perspective, I launched the first version of Drupal early in 2001 and organized the first Drupal conference or helped organize it in 2005. So, 4 years later. And I think about 30 people or something showed up at DrupalCon Antwerp, that very first conference. And, so to go from 0 or from 1 to, 40, 30 or 40 people after 4 years, I don't know, that's not hyper growth, so to speak, but at the same time, it felt like amazing at the time. Like I couldn't imagine that there's 40 people or so interested in talking about Drupal, every day for a week. So, so it's been this snowball, if you will, of, compounding growth.
There she is.
There I am. Yeah. I remember Drupal from the old days. I actually, it's funny, I really wanted to go to, I think in 2007, where was that? There was a Sunnyvale conference, and it was pretty small still. And, there were a bunch of conferences I couldn't make it for whatever reason. And the first DrupalCon I ever actually made it to was in Paris, which only had around 800 people or something. But that,
Sunnyvale
seems
was
tiny now, but so. Yeah.
Yeah, Sunnyvale 300. I think Paris was 800 or 900.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine 40 people or so.
Yeah. Yeah, now there are thousands of people.
Yeah, thousands and thousands. And now it's virtual, so even more people can show up.
There is
virtually.
I prefer them in person, but it's also nice to be virtual.
Is it you plan to make it in person again later, eventually, right? I hope.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. For us, these events have been really important, Doc, because we work together virtual with thousands of people. One of the things that we've learned is that there's so much value in getting together in person. And just in terms of building relationships and getting to know each other, it just facilitates and makes the online collaboration a lot easier. So that's why we do these DrupalCons, but also we have every year there is, over 100 Drupal Camps, we call them. These are smaller events, anywhere from maybe 100 people to some of them are over 1,000 people as well, like the one in the Bay Area. It's called Bat Camp, Bay Area Drupal Camp. I think they attract maybe close to 2,000 people. So we have hundreds of in-person events, and it's really been helpful in terms of building the community. You can see some of the camps and the logos here. They all have their own flavor, their own logo, etc., etc. So lots of user groups around the world. So yeah, we definitely want to go back in person, in my opinion.
Yeah. What are the typical topics at a DrupalCon? I'm frozen in time as a blogger, so I don't know much about what happens, in the many possible different uses of Drupal.
We tend to have different tracks. There's usually like a couple hundred sessions, actually, so quite a lot of things. But we're focused on developers, on marketers, content creators, right? All of the different personas or stakeholders, designers and themers. So, for developers right now, we're talking a lot about headless and decoupled architectures and, using Drupal as a content store and then pushing content into JavaScript applications, whether it's React, Angular, Vue, or non-JavaScript application, even voice assistants and chatbots, etc. So that's kind of a hot topic right now in the Drupal community. Obviously every Drupal site needs to be themed. It needs to have its own look and feel. So there's an entire community around building themes or templates for Drupal, and they have their own best practices and things that they want to share amongst themselves. And then content creators is obviously kind of our audience too, because at the end, developers and designers, they build a site which is being used by marketers and content creators to publish. And so Drupal has a lot of features and functionality around SEO optimization, workflows, publishing processes. I mean, you name it. So all of these are topics of DrupalCons. So we try to cater to all of the stakeholders.
I think also, DrupalCon is a really great place for people who are new to Drupal to get their feet wet and get kind of a crash course, and you meet people who will help you, and there's a lot of really good sort of newcomer content, which is really useful, I think, to a lot of people.
Yeah, and we try to really focus on helping people become contributors to Drupal.
Yeah.
So we do like mentorship programs where we teach the art of open source contribution, and specifically Drupal contribution. So we learn where we teach them about Git and how to file bugs and how to help with our documentation system, all of these things, which is really kind of nice to see. People get so much energy from going to a DrupalCon and then making their first contribution. It's like a real achievement for a lot of people that attend.
Yeah, it was for me. I got to do a live commit one year. It was pretty exciting. The highlight of my DrupalCon. They get you up on stage and you do it like live in front of everybody. It's pretty cool. So do you have any sort of, what would you tell new people who maybe can't go to DrupalCon yet, or about how to get started contributing to Drupal?
Yeah, there's many different ways. I mean, first of all, it's, what area would you like to contribute in, right? So, and we literally value every contribution, whether it's helping to organize an event, whether it's with the marketing of Drupal, whether it's, a technical contribution, like a code change or a documentation contribution, or, helping to translate Drupal into a different language. I think, first thing is like, what are people interested in, passionate about? And then for each of those, we have documentation around how to get involved. We have a roadmap. We have strategic initiatives. And so, it's a little bit of aligning interests with, the things that are going to move the needle for Drupal. So that would be something that people can think through. But once they find their area to contribute, there is documentation that they can read. We have Slack channels around each of these topics where you can, ask what needs to be done. We also do categorize every issue in our ticketing system, and we mark them like novice, for example. So if you've never contributed or you have very limited experience contributing, you can filter all of the issues by the novice tag, and these will typically be, very simple contributions. Like sometimes it's like a one-line change, and so these are good things to, for people that want to get involved, that don't know where to start. So lots of options, really. We have office hours a lot for each of the strategic initiatives. There's like a weekly meeting you can join and raise your hand. So all of that is available on d.o, drupal.org. So I would check there.
So this is officially the 20th anniversary of Drupal. Yes, that's this year.
It is, yeah. I released the first version of Drupal on January 15th of 20 years ago, which actually, funny enough, the same birthday as Wikipedia, which also
really?
turned
That's
20
funny.
on the exact same day.
Really?
Yeah.
How
Wow.
funny. I did
Happy
not know
coincidence,
that.
I think.
It's like Abraham Lincoln and Darwin were born on the same day.
Is that true? Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Really?
There's a good book about that called Angels and Ages by Adam Gopnik.
Oh.
Where's the name Drupal come from? Or maybe you just told us that I was busy trying to make a channel.
You know what? It's a little bit of a story, but I mentioned that I had to move my message board from an intranet to the public internet, and so I had to register a domain name, obviously. And I wanted to register dorp, DORP.org, which is Dutch or Flemish for small village, because, as I mentioned, we had this small community, and I felt that was an appropriate name. But I accidentally made a typo, and I switched the O and the R, and ended up registering drop.org, DROP.org. And I'm like, wow, it's like a 4-letter word. It's an English word. It's pretty good. I'll keep this. And so that was my site for a while, where I would do my own blogging and experimenting. And when I decided to make the software behind drop.org available as open source, I had to pick a name. And I literally spent 30 seconds thinking about the name. But it went like this. So drop in Dutch is Drupal. And I figured, how would an English-speaking person pronounce the Dutch word Drupal? And I came up with Drupal, and that's what I picked. And I also copied the GPL license file from my Linux kernel tree into my website, created a tarball or a zip file for those that are not familiar, and uploaded it to drop.org. And that was literally how I released the first version of Drupal 20 years ago. So it was a quick decision. There wasn't, wasn't any. And actually, funny enough, like for the first, several years, a lot of people said Drupal, and those that pronounced Drupal were kind of in the inner circle almost. Because we knew, like, when somebody said Drupal, that they hadn't been involved with Drupal for too long. And a lot of people said it's a terrible name. Nobody's going to take it serious with a name like that. And then they would point to our logo, which is this evil-looking cartoon character, I guess. And they said no organization will take that serious either. And so it was a lot of, in the early days, talk about rebranding, changing the name, changing the logo. But we stuck with it. So
I would think Drupal would be the French pronunciation.
Evil logo.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, just think of it. In what language they could emphasize the final syllable.
So
Go ahead, Katherine.
we have a question from the people out there in the internets. What could you tell us about comparing Drupal to other popular platforms? I mean, I'm super biased, so I would just say, well, Drupal's better, use it. But I wonder if you could go into why people should use Drupal as opposed to, WordPress, Joomla, or what is Drupal particularly good for?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we see is that Drupal is a number one platform for like larger and more complex websites. So I would say, actually, if you look at the enterprise segment, like roughly 1 out of 10 websites in the world run on Drupal. If you look at the overall market, all the websites in the world, it's about 1 out of 30 websites. So a lot of websites. So the benefits of Drupal are that it's very flexible and I think well architected, and it really is compelling, I think, for more complex websites where maybe you want to customize it. You want to create some modules, or you want to do more than having a blog or a basic brochure style website. If you want to build a web application, interactive elements, that's where Drupal really starts to shine. And also when you need scale and performance and security. Drupal has a reputation of being maybe a little bit harder to use, but in return, you get a lot of power and flexibility, as well as scalability and security. So Drupal powers some of the largest sites in the world, some of the top 50 websites in the world that do billions of page views a month. And at the same time, it powers very small sites, like my blog or something. So it can be used for all of these things, but where it really shines is, I call it ambitious websites in a way, the ones where you can't use a templated approach, you can't use a cookie cutter kind of website. And, obviously, when we compete against proprietary content management systems, we win because of open source, because of the openness, the flexibility, and the community. As I mentioned, we have a very large community, and the community really translates into a lot of innovation. We have like 40-something thousand modules or plugins or extensions. So that gives organizations, an amazing starting point where you can literally assemble very powerful web applications in very little time. And so time to market, I would say, that is a result of having a large community of contributors is pretty compelling too. So it's a little bit all over the place, I guess, but hopefully that gives you a sense.
Yeah.
And, yeah. I think Drupal
I was going to say
worldwide is a number 2 behind WordPress, right? So I think WordPress has more scale. It's larger than Drupal, but it also tends to focus a little bit more on the lower end of the market. And Drupal skews towards the high end of the market. And obviously there is a lot of overlap in the middle there. But if you can picture kind of a Venn diagram, where Drupal tends to be for more complex, more powerful sites, and WordPress tends to be for more simple sites with a large overlap in the middle.
I always felt, back with Linux Journal, that we had just enough complexity that I didn't think I would feel comfortable doing it with something other than Drupal, honestly. And I had, investigated lots of things and used them for other projects, but I don't think I could have handled Linux Journal without Drupal. So we're on the current major version of Drupal is 9, and people are still using 8 and probably still a lot of 7 and even a little 6. But I wondered if you could tell us what, some exciting things are about the roadmap for Drupal 9 and 10 even, that people could, look forward to and maybe get excited about, or maybe even get excited about contributing to.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on. But there's a couple of kind of key areas of focus, I would say. One is headless and decoupled architectures. We touched upon that, but Drupal has now out of the box a REST API. We support JSON API as well as GraphQL. And so what that means is that people can use Drupal as a very powerful content backend to store content, manage content, and then push that content into any kind of front-end application, really. That's something that we've been working on for like 6 years. I mean, it's not new. I think we've been leading in that area and are recognized as a leader in headless and decoupled. But it's still an area where we want to keep, where we're investing more in, and we're starting to build JavaScript components that people can easily use in their React and Angular applications. So that's kind of one area. Another area is around ease of use, and specifically for content creators. So, things like a new media library where you can easily, pick images or other digital assets and use them in your posts and then reuse them, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we invested quite a bit in making that a lot easier to use. We have a new look and feel, both on the front end and the back end. And we paid incredible amount of attention to accessibility, for example, to make sure it's inclusive and everybody can use Drupal, which is something that we're all very proud of in the Drupal community. We've been investing in things like configuration management, which is kind of an enterprise feature, but like, how do you share configuration between sites, best practices, etc. And so we can export configuration to files, manage those files in Git if you want, and share those files between Drupal sites. So we've got these kinds of power features that a lot of the developers in the Drupal community use. I don't know, a lot of other things, upgrading a lot of the components that Drupal is using. Like, we use Symfony as an example. We're upgrading that to Symfony 5, various JavaScript components. So we're constantly keeping up with all of the innovation around us of the third-party libraries that we depend on. So you get all of these innovations that these projects have as well, which a lot of developers are also excited about. These are some of the things that we're working on. And that's just for the base version of Drupal, what we call Drupal core. And then obviously all of the, modules or extensions, they have their own roadmaps and, their own innovations going on too.
Right. So what can you tell us about security? There have been, several open source platforms. WordPress has had them, others have had them, have had really big sort of noteworthy and newsworthy security vulnerabilities. How does Drupal address security, both with core and with add-on contributed modules, particularly related to Drupal, but also how does it compare to other projects?
Yeah, I think we have a better track record than other projects. And obviously I'm biased, but
yeah, me too.
there is, independent organizations that track the number of, security vulnerabilities in all open source content management systems. Actually, the U.S. government has as an official tracker, compares Drupal against Adobe, WordPress, and others, and Drupal consistently is the most safe and secure. One of the reasons why, I think, is because we have a dedicated security team. I think it has like 30 or 40 people on it, and they're constantly thinking about how to make Drupal more secure. And some of that is by being proactive, like the way we've designed our APIs in Drupal. So when people build modules for Drupal and they use the APIs, then it's going to be like, secure by default, if you will. Obviously, you can still make mistakes, but through smart API design, we try to minimize security vulnerabilities. If you use the APIs like they're designed, you typically don't have to think too much about a lot of the common security challenges or common security mistakes you can make. Yeah, we have a security team. They do security reviews. They're constantly working with different module maintainers to, help them guide through security vulnerabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's just been a focus of us. And I think because of that, we've done well,
Yeah, I think for new users, you can also, you'll notice when you look for Drupal modules on Drupal.org, you'll see a lot of them show that they have security coverage, which is a reassuring thing, I think, for most people. Could you tell us just a tiny bit about what that means?
Yeah,
or a contributed module, I mean.
So we have so many modules. It's hard for the security team to be involved in every module, right? And so what they've done is they handpicked, if you will, a subset of all the modules where they provide security coverage for. And that means that they're going to help make these or keep these modules secure, basically. And so for end users, we make that visible on the download pages of these modules. And so if you're looking, do I use this module or that module? Let's say you're looking to implement, a photo gallery or something. There might be 5 modules to choose from. Not all 5 of them might have security coverage. So it can be a factor in somebody's decision making, like, do I use this module or that module? It's a best practice to go with a module that has security coverage, especially if it meets all of your needs as an end user. So it's a service that we have, I guess. I guess I can call it a service that I haven't seen other open source projects do. Or
yeah, I think I think it's really helpful.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So we've been
and the
talking
other
a while.
reason why we're so secure is, I think, because of the nature of the customers and users of Drupal. We have a lot of mission-critical organizations use Drupal. I mean, the White House, for example, used Drupal for, during the Obama administration. And I can tell you that these kinds of organizations, they do like deep security audits of Drupal. And imagine now maybe 100 of those kinds of organizations in the world, all independently doing their security audits, right? And if they find something, they have a team of people, the security team, to work with to resolve these issues. So one way to think about it is, because of the nature of the end users and some of the mission criticalness and their ability to audit Drupal because it's open source, has really led to Drupal being quite robust in terms of security. Like, it's been analyzed by a lot of different organizations, and obviously it's always changing. We keep innovating, we keep adding things, and also attack vectors are changing. So it's never guaranteed to be perfect by any means, but we do have a lot of users that care about security and care deeply, and that are contributing to keeping Drupal secure.
Awesome. I don't know if Doc has anything, but before we run out of time, I really wanted to get into. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was going to talk about the paid contribution to open source. Yeah.
My only question at the moment was, tell us about Acquia. I mean, your company. Because it's a pretty big deal company. So, and who's a typical customer? What does it do? How does it mesh with the open source world? Mm-hmm. Those things.
Yeah. So I started Acquia 7 years after I started Drupal. So, 7 years into Drupal, I realized that for Drupal to be successful, it needed a very robust commercial ecosystem around the project. And really, it felt like it needed a company that was going to be to Drupal what maybe Red Hat was to Linux, that just gave it that support and enterprise credibility. And that's how Acquia was born. In 2007 is when we started the company. And not everybody has heard about Acquia, but we have actually been one of the fastest growing private technology companies in the United States, funny enough. And today we're a software company. We sell different products around Drupal, and all the way from Acquia Cloud, which specializes in call it hosting Drupal sites, but it's a PaaS platform, a platform as a service. We provide developer tools, load testing tools, security tools. Think of it as a white glove enterprise hosting solution, all the way to products like Acquia Search, which kind of supercharges Drupal's built-in search to other marketing solutions that help you target or sell more stuff on your Drupal site. I mean, that's kind of the basic premise. So think of it as a collection of products that we have. Our typical customers are large organizations. I mean, we work with some of the largest companies in the world, all the way from Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Nestle, to Department of Defense, Department of Justice, to Australian government. Some of these organizations have thousands of Drupal sites, which might be worth talking about for a minute because it kind of gives you a sense of what we do. But let's say you're Nestle or Johnson & Johnson or Pfizer, just to go back to these names. They have hundreds of products, and they operate in every country in the world pretty much. And it means very often that they need a website for every product in every region. And that's how they get to, thousands of websites. And so how do you manage 1,000 websites? How do you govern that? How do you make sure if there is a security bug, you can roll out a security fix in 30 minutes or less? These are the kinds of things that we do and the kinds of products that we have built. And so if you're a Pfizer or a Johnson & Johnson, we literally save them millions of dollars. And we help them, have good governance, have good security, maximize their innovation, that kind of stuff. But we also have a lot of universities as customers. They also have often thousands of sites, nonprofits. I mean, it's a little bit of everything, really. We're kind of a platform company. I think Drupal users that are really serious about Drupal or that need to take it really serious because it's very strategic to their business, they tend to look at the different kinds of products that Acquia has to offer.
I have a personal favorite.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's King Arthur Flower. I learned that on Twitter, actually. I think King Arthur Flower has been something of a hero and kept people pretty sane during the pandemic with all of their recipes and learning to do things like sourdough. It's kind of it's interesting to think about what kind of effect that sort of thing has, during a time like this.
It's a great example. They've been a customer for a long time, actually, Katherine. And when the pandemic hit, they needed to rethink some of their business model, and they pivoted really quickly to being more of a commerce, online commerce company. And they really started to focus on having these recipes, et cetera, et cetera. And we actually saw their site traffic, grow by more than 200, maybe close to 300%. And when that happens and you're on our Acquia products, you don't lose sleep over these kinds of spikes in traffic. Another example is maybe the Mueller report, if you remember.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I did know.
Yeah, the Department of, I think it was Justice, I could be wrong, but
yeah, I think it was DOJ.
They're using Drupal, and they came have to actually look it up. I think they said, they called us and they said, we are about to launch a report. We can't tell you what it is, but it might get a lot of traffic. And we're publishing it in an hour, they said. And so, I just looked it up, and based on, I think, Federal Computer Week and a couple of other outlets, they reported that there was a 7,000% increase in traffic. And in the first hour of the reports, they had almost 250 million unique visitors. So they probably went from very little traffic to 250 million unique visitors in an hour. And that's the kind of scenario where, that we're really good at. We can scale up infrastructure very quickly and keep with these massive spikes. So,
well, I'm glad you mentioned that one. I wasn't sure.
And Acquia, of course, too. But, again, it speaks to the scalability of Drupal. Sorry, Katherine, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I remembered that being a thing, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because I wouldn't have known if I was allowed to say that or not, that Acquia hosted the Mueller report. It's exciting stuff.
We're allowed.
Good, awesome. So speaking of Acquia, I think this is probably a good place to ask you about something that we actually talked about in the past in preparation, and that is paid contribution to open source. There's a lot of sort of controversy, actually, I think. A lot of open source projects' contributions tend to be dominated by just a handful of companies, or even a single company, right? And I just kind of wondered how you see that. Maybe you could talk about, Acquia's approach, but also how you see that playing out in the future in general. I think we've seen a lot of companies opt for more restrictive licenses or sort of open core models. And do you think there are other solutions to that? And how do you see this going forward?
Yeah, I think Drupal is very unique in that regard, and maybe worth paying attention to. But as I mentioned, we have more than 1,200 organizational contributors. So Drupal is very much a story where there isn't one super large contributor. Like Acquia is the largest contributor to Drupal. I think we have maybe 20 or more full-time contributors, people that we pay, and contributing to the open source Drupal is the main thing that they do. That's their mission, I guess. And so with that, our Acquia is the largest contributor. But if you look at how much we contribute as Acquia, it's actually less than 5% of all the contributions. So our approach is very distributed, which is very different from a lot of other open source projects or even open source businesses, right? Like you look at Elastic Path and these kinds of companies, more often you see one large contributor, the company behind the open source project, contributing, 90% of all the code, and some contribution from a community on the edges. The Drupal world is really community-led, where there is a lot of different contributors, and I think that's very healthy for open source and very healthy for the Drupal project, because ultimately it makes you more resilient, frankly. We also only have one version of Drupal, meaning it's 100% open source. Like we don't have an open source version and then a enterprise version or something where not everything is open source. So everything that we do that's Drupal is open source. As I mentioned, we do have services that we sell as Acquia, but they're like a hosting service, which is kind of detached from Drupal. So we have a single license, a very distributed community, and a lot of different contributors. And that has been great. It's been, that has helped us be scalable and sustainable
I have a thought actually about another. So I wanted to ask you actually, now that you've done this for 20 years, which is a long, long time. If you could start it over and just scrap the whole thing and rebuild it, what would you do differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. Couple of things. Maybe to continue on this theme. I think at first, and again, 20 years ago, open source was really not accepted at large, and it was kind of a weird thing. And it was still kind of like this freedom movement in many ways. And commercial involvement was often, frowned upon, really. Like people did, it was a sort of the anti-establishment. But along the way, I definitely recognized the value of commercial involvement, meaning, companies contributing or organizations contributing. And fast forward to today, and 2/3 of all of the contributions are actually paid for or sponsored by an organization. So, the majority of Drupal's contributions are sponsored contributions. And that's been very good for Drupal. It has helped us go faster, but it's also been healthy for the contributors. It's good to pay people to contribute to open source. And one thing that I would do differently is I would embrace that faster. There was reluctance around that. Commercial involvement is bad. It's going to destroy open source. And I think what we've learned is that is not necessarily the case. In fact, it's the opposite. The other thing I would do differently is listen to other stakeholders faster. And it's easy to say now, but at the time, I was working on Drupal on my own at first, and then, as I mentioned, I opened it up to others. But it was very focused on other developers that wanted to use Drupal for their own experimental platform. And this actually resulted in Drupal being very developer heavy or very developer focused and having really terrible user experience for less technical people, like maybe a content creator or author. And I think that has hurt Drupal along the way. And it even has given Drupal a reputation of being harder to use. And I think we've made a lot of changes and improvements over the years, focused on the out-of-the-box experience and ease of use. I think we've overcome a lot of these things. But if I were to do things differently, I would focus on ease of use much sooner. And that's easy to say now, but I have to remember that at the time, again, my plan was never to,
right.
Make Drupal available to like for Drupal to become really big. I really didn't care, so to speak. It was just a tool that I built for myself, and I was comfortable with it being hard to use. So, anyway, that would be the other part of my answer.
Well, if I can use it, they can figure it out. Everyone can figure it out. That's what I tell people. I figured it out. You're fine.
But it's funny, like we did this research, and we compared Drupal with other CMSs, WordPress, Joomla, Sitecore, Adobe. And we interviewed newbies, people with medium experience, and experts. And it kind of created two opposite curves, where newbies, they loved WordPress, Adobe, Sitecore. But as they matured, as they evolved and became experts, they started to love Adobe, Sitecore, WordPress, and every other CMS less. So their slope went down. They loved it in the beginning. And as their skills improved, they started to like it less. And Drupal's curve was the exact opposite. Like for newbies, they didn't quite like it as much. But as they became experts, they started to love it more and more, and love it more than the other CMSs. So we have this weird kind of dynamic where Drupal is hard to use, but if you kind of push through, if you will, and you become an expert, it gives you like these superpowers that make you feel really good, about what you can do. And you're obviously an example of that. Like, you've been doing Drupal so long.
I don't know any other way, frankly, but I think also you hit a wall of limitation pretty quickly with other platforms, in my experience. Even before I knew what I was doing with Drupal, I found myself trying to use Joomla or trying to use WordPress or to do something, to do whatever it was, and I would go, this is going to be, nope, I'm going to switch back to Drupal because I know that I can expand it in this way, and you have that sort of like Lego model where you can control things very granularly. That was my perception at the time, anyway.
Very true. No, I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. Here, and I've got several more questions listed here. One brief one. You mentioned GPL early on. Is the base code still GPL, or are you on other licenses, or still GPL?
It's GPL. Yeah, has been GPL for 20 years.
So version 2 like Linux, I guess.
That's correct. Yeah, and actually, we actually in the process, encouraged or forced other projects to relicense this GPL. Like we were the first to use jQuery, for example, before jQuery was known, and there was a different license, and we said we want to use it in Drupal, but we really want it to be GPL, and the author relicensed it as GPL. We helped push for React to be open sourced, as an example, using a GPL compatible license, et cetera, et cetera. So, in our 20-year journey, we've because we want to be able to use these components, and, we've helped convert other software to GPL.
So at the end of the show, we always ask 4 questions, and one of them, the first is, are there any questions that we haven't asked that you would like us to have asked and we missed?
I don't think so. Think of any, but no, these were great questions.
Yeah, thanks. The second is, and this is our control question, do you have anything to say about blockchain?
You know what, I do. I don't know if you're going to like it or not, but I think that there is some really interesting things about the blockchain. I think there's a fundamental set of problems around scaling and sustaining open source, as well as governance and decision making, where blockchain could actually be a huge help for open source. An example could be quadratic voting. It's a way to make decisions as a group in a democratic way, and it's hard to organize these things, but some of the experiments that are happening in the blockchain would allow us to implement those. There's also funding models that they're experimenting with in the blockchain world that I think could be applicable to open source. And then if you start to combine those things, decision-making tools, economic systems, funding models, there's a lot there that I think could help us grow and sustain open source communities. I haven't seen anything kind of pan out yet, but I think there's seeds, and it's kind of worth paying attention to. So I think there's issues with the blockchain and et cetera, I'm not like a complete fanboy, let's say, but I do think there's some really interesting things emerging that open source community should pay attention to. I don't know if I failed your test, but
No, that's really interesting. In fact, I was thinking, boy, I'd love to go down the hole, whether it's a rat hole or not, of quadratic voting. You hear quadratic, you're expecting equation, and you hear voting. It's like, whoa, that's interesting.
What is it?
Okay, the final two are, what are your favorite scripting language and text editor?
I'm a VI user actually, and for scripting language, I would pick PHP. Drupal is built in PHP. I think it's easy for me to use. I know it well, and it's been actually kind of cool to see all of the innovation lately in PHP. It's kind of like going through a renaissance movement almost, where the language is becoming better, more powerful, faster. Like, it's really kind of exciting. So I'll pick those, but I'm happy to use any language really. I'm not religious about my languages.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a quick hour. We thank you so much for being with us, and we'll have to have you back. As soon as we
the blockchain.
Can. Yeah, we'll talk about that. That's really interesting. That's not usually what we get is, oh, geez, it soaks up a whole lot of cycles, and why burden everybody's computer with it, and just a whhole lot of what you might call political issues, as well as technical ones.
No doubt, there is those. But I also think they're working on solutions around those. But there are a lot.
Side chains and so forth. There's okay, well, fantastic, Dries. It's been wonderful having you here, and we'll see you soon, I hope.
Yeah, happy to come back, and thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So Katherine, how'd it go for you? You had technical issues up front that we didn't expect.
I had some technical issues. Yeah, I don't have access to the same back channel. I'm a little out of my comfort zone, but it's all okay, and it worked out, and that was fun. It's nice to chat with Dries in a completely different environment.
Setting, it was fun. Thanks for asking all these questions.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll be well received. We'll see.
Of course, it's about the Drupals. Why wouldn't it be?
Well, it's been great. So this is the point where we get to plug stuff. So I don't, because I'm the host. But Katherine, do you have anything to plug? I can guess what you'll plug because.
Yeah, I can guess. Well, I have a couple things. Probably the same thing as the last time. But one is Doc and I do a podcast together, in addition to me occasionally joining him here, and that is reality2cast.com, which is a lot of fun. It's not all open source and tech related. We go into a lot of sort of like social issues and future of the internet and stuff like that. The other thing is what I actually am working on, where it's an Acquia product conveniently. So I thought I'd give a little shout out to the project that I'm working on, which is Acquia CMS, which is maybe going to help people use Drupal a little more easily. Or at least that's my hope.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Dries and Katherine, and everybody who's with us now and in the future. Next week, we have Keith Packard on, who's just really interesting. He's a veteran who's contributed a lot of code to the world. So come back next week for that one. He has something called freedesktop.org, but he's done much more than that. He and I actually hung out on a boat once many years ago and had lots to talk about then that he might remember that I don't. But anyway, that's coming up next week. So thanks again. This has been Floss Weekly, and we'll see you next week.
Hey, if you like tech news, but you also like hearing about it from the people who are actually writing the stories, well, I've got a show for you. It's called Tech News Weekly, and it's me, Jason Howell, along with my co-host, Micah Sargent. Every week, we invite the people making and breaking the biggest tech news stories from around the web onto this show to talk to us about it. It's a lot of fun. You should check it out. Tech News Weekly can be found at twit.tv/TNW every Thursday. We'll see you there.